I'm just laughing because he got beat up so bad. He got beat up so bad. Sorry, I'm just laughing. He got beat up so bad. Sorry, I'm just laughing.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Has had to wait so long for his shot at the world title. How likely is it that he will get his shot in February?
Well, he's a mandatory contender. He's WBC interim champion. And the date that was set for the next mandatory is February 2021. And that's the way it ends right now. The WBC is going to look at every single weight category with the championships and with the mandatories and every single situation that has to do with each particular situation regarding this pandemic. But Dillion White is a mandatory for February 2021.
He beat Robert Helenius in 2017 in October. I think he became the WBC #1 the following month when the rankings were updated, but he still hasn't got a shot at the main champion. It becomes very difficult to convince the casual fan as to why that is.
Being #1 does not necessarily mean that you are the mandatory contender. He's a tremendous fighter. He's very loyal. He has expressed that it's his dream and desire to fight only for the green and gold belt. That's been a process, and as I said, I just like to put it behind and concentrate on his status as interim champion and mandatory contender.
With Wilder undergoing surgery, I think on the bicep, would there be an option to mandate Dillian against Tyson Fury and make that fight now?
The date is February 2021. Wilder rematch with Fury is a contractual situation that they have. That's their own contract, their own situation legally. For the WBC, the mandatory is Dillion White for the time that was stipulated.
You know, I heard these sound bites from Mauricio Sulaiman in reference to Dillion White's situation, his rank, the fact he's been the #1 contender for, I don't know, 2 going on 3 years?
Just about.
That Mauricio Sulaiman, the WBC's president himself, can't reconcile
The situation?
the WBC's own logic. That their numerical rank standings hold no bearing over who the mandatory challenger is, which begs the question, then why rank these fighters in numerical order in the first place? What's the use in ranking top 5, top 10, or top 15 guys when their numerical rank standing holds no bearing over the pecking order? The WBC reserves the right to pick and choose who the mandatory challengers are, regardless of their numerical rank standing. Okay, then why are you ranking these fighters in numerical order in the first place?
No fucking reason.
At the time when Dillion White was ranked at #1,
And still is.
both Dominic Breazeale, who was ranked behind Dillion, and Tyson Fury
After the first fight.
were both ordered to fight Deontay Wilder at a time when Dillion White was ranked at #1, and still is.
Make it make sense.
Mauricio clearly can't.
And won't.
Just like he can't reconcile why the Bronze Bomber's injury would not bring forward Dillion White's shot at the title. Deontay Wilder reportedly had surgery.
To his bicep.
So if the guy's coming off of surgery, one would assume, okay, well, this guy might be incapacitated for a while. Does that bring Dillion White closer to his title shot?
Nope.
Apparently not. Apparently he still has to wait.
Why is that?
You'd be hard-pressed to get any answers, any coherent answers from the WBC president himself.
Good fucking luck.
But we all know what's going on here. We all know that these sanctioning bodies, many of them, reserve the right to pick and choose who gets the shot and who doesn't.
At least in this instance.
At least when we're talking about the WBC. The IBF is more of a straight shooter. The WBO is a bit more understandable. The WBA, that's a clusterfuck. And the WBC, forget about it. These guys operate with complete impunity.
They do what they want.
And they've been doing this for years. I take you back to 1998 when Garcia Rocchigiani fought for what was the vacant WBC light heavyweight title against Michael Nunn.
Okay.
He managed to win the title only to be stripped of it upon Roy Jones Jr.'s announcement that he was going to be staying at light heavyweight. At this point, Graciano was reduced to an interim champion.
Downgraded.
At which point, Graciano filed suit and was awarded $31 million in damages by a New York City federal court jury in 2003 from a lawsuit against the WBC and its president,
The now deceased Jose Sulaiman.
The WBC would eventually file Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2003. The two parties, Graciano and the WBC, reached a private settlement which was reputed to span 7 years. And the varying grotesqueries of this particular situation involving Graciano and the WBC, those particulars could have us here for hours.
The point is...
Point of it is, the WBC has a long history of doing whatever the fuck they want, whenever the fuck they want.
It almost costed them big time in 2003.
They have since then refined their methods, reserved the right to manipulate their own rank standings at their leisure.
Whenever they feel like it.
One might feel so inclined to ask, when reviewing the WBC's very dubious practices, why is it that Dillion White might have to end up waiting 1,200 days for a title shot he should have got a long time ago? Did Dominic Breazeale have to wait 1,200 days? Did Tyson Fury have to wait 1,200 days? Why is it that in the case of Dillion White,
This is taking so long.
from the time that Dominic Breazeale beat Eric Molina, from the time that Tyson Fury mounted his comeback and fought both Sefer Seferi, Francesco Pianetta, and Deontay Wilder,
The first time.
why is it that these guys didn't have to wait 1,200 days in order to be ordered to fight Deontay Wilder, mandated to fight him? Why is it that they didn't have to wait as long as Dillion, yet Dillion, this whole time, has been ranked ahead of them?
Number one.
Why is that? Why is it that on November 4th of 2017, after Dominic Breazeale had stopped Eric Molina, the president of the WBC himself, Mauricio Sulaiman, was quoted as saying that fight was not a final eliminator and that the winner was not the mandatory challenger, only for that same Mauricio Sulaiman of that same WBC to double back on his word April 25th of 2018, stating that Dominic Breazeale was in fact Wilder's mandatory challenger based on the Eric Molina fight.
Really?
That Dillion White would have to fight Luis Ortiz for, get this, a second mandatory slot.
What?
Even though at the time that Dominic Breazeale fought Eric Molina, Dillion White was already ranked ahead of the both of them.
What?
At the time that contest between Dominic Breazeale and Eric Molina took place, Dominic Breazeale entered the ring as the number 6th ranked contender in the WBC's ranked standings, whereas Eric Molina was ranked at number 12. Now, at the time that this news broke in April of 2018, WBC had announced that Dominic Breazeale would be Wilder's primary mandatory challenger, and the most that Dillion could do is fight for a secondary slot. At this time, Dillion White was still ranked ahead of Dominic Breazeale. He was their number 1 contender. How is it that the number 6 guy beating the number 12 guy gets the winner of that fight ahead of the number 1 guy?
What the fuck?
Dillion White was ordered to fight Luis Ortiz for a secondary Mando spot.
Secondary.
Behind Dominic Breazeale. Dominic Breazeale, who was already ranked behind Dillion at the time he fought Eric Molina. At the time he beat Eric Molina. Make it make sense. What could have made more sense? To have the winner of White versus Ortiz be Wilder's first mandatory, and the winner of Breazeale versus Molina be Wilder's second mandatory.
Yeah, I think so.
I think if this would have been the pecking order, perhaps Dillion White would have complied with the order.
Yeah, I think so.
More so, on April 25th of 2018, wouldn't it have made even more sense to simply crown Dillion White the WBC's mandatory challenger, as by this time he'd been their number 1 contender for several months?
Yeah.
So why was the WBC trying to stage more eliminators? Why not just award Dillion White mandatory status, since he'd been sitting there for quite some time?
Beats me.
And since then, we've seen the WBC order the Breazeale fight. We've even seen them order the Tyson Fury rematch.
Remember that?
That in and of itself is pretty bizarre, considering that Deontay Wilder fought Tyson Fury the first time as a voluntary. After the fight, the WBC goes ahead and orders Wilder to fight him again as a mandatory.
In January of last year.
I know that the rematch didn't take place right away. Several things happened in the mean in between time, but better still, the WBC saw it fit to order Deontay Wilder to fight Tyson Fury for a second time at a time when Dillion White's sitting there at number 1.
What gives?
It's pretty much accents what I've been telling you all along, what I've been telling you for the past, 2-3 years. The WBC reserves the right to manipulate their own rank standings at their leisure, and that even though their rank standings come in numerical order, that numerical order counts for nothing, because in the end, it will be the WBC that decides who gets the title shot and who doesn't, no matter how long they've been waiting, no matter where they are ranked.
Whether they deserve it or not.
The WBC reserves the right to make that decision.
Pretty much.
This is why Mauricio Sulaiman can't reconcile the varying inconsistencies of the WBC's business practices. This is why he can't make it make sense, because it doesn't make sense. The only way it makes sense is if you guys are making Dillion White jump through hoops where you haven't made other people jump through hoops, and that in and of itself begs certain questions. Why are you making this guy jump through hoops? Why are you adding steps to the process? Why are you okay ordering Dominic Breazeale and Tyson Fury to fight Deontay Wilder, but Dillion White's got to do X, Y, and Z before he can even sniff
Get close enough to even sniff.
the green belt? Why indeed, ladies and gentlemen? Why indeed? Moving on. Danny Garcia says, if Spence ain't better, don't get in the ring. Don't want no excuses. A portion of the article reads, Garcia was blunt when asked during a recent appearance on the Yak and Barack show if he is concerned that he wouldn't get credit for defeating Spence. Not at all, because if you ain't 100%, don't get in the ring. Garcia said on a show that streams daily on DAZN and Sirius XM. If you ain't ready, don't get in the ring, you know? That's just that simple, you know? I know they say Manny's older now, but he's coming off a big win. So if he's old, don't get in the ring. If Spence ain't better, don't get in the ring, because I don't want to hear no excuses. I never made no excuses. You know, I seen things in the Mikey Garcia fight, even though he won that fight. Danny Garcia said of Spence's victory in March of 2019. You know, he won by a big score, but I saw things in that fight that, you know, I'm bigger than Mikey, I'm stronger than Mikey, and Mikey did some good things in that fight. He was just beat by the bigger, better man. You know what I mean? And then, in the Sean Porter fight, you know, I saw he was getting hit a lot, you know? When I fought Porter, it wasn't even a hard fight for me like that. You know what I mean? It was just he threw more, and that's why he won, basically. But I seen him get hit a lot in that fight, and I seen a lot of mistakes where I feel like, you know, I can take this guy. I'm 100% confident I can take him. The reality of things is, if Danny were to win this fight against Errol Spence in what would be Errol Spence's first fight since the car accident, there would be a lot of people out there saying, you know what, you only really got the guy because of what he's coming from.
Like it or not.
And if Danny really were the kind of fighter that wanted to take a champion on without the handicaps, without the excuses, he would have chose to fight Terrence Crawford. He would have either scrapped that Adrian Granados fight to fight for a world title, take up Top Rank on the offer he was made, or after the Granados fight, he would have chosen to fight Terrence instead of Ivan. Lest we forget, Danny's last 2 fights, Adrian Granados, Ivan Redkach.
Yep.
Willfully chose to fight those guys, none of which are world champions in the welterweight division, none of which were top 10 fighters in the welterweight division.
Neither of them.
Willfully chose to fight those guys at a time where he could have been fighting Terrence Crawford. With Terrence Crawford, you don't have to worry about the state of that guy. You don't have to worry about excuses after the fight, because Terrence Crawford, unlike Errol Spence, wasn't just in a car accident. Now, I understand that based on reports, Danny Garcia and Errol Spence agreed in principle to fight early this year at some point last year, before Errol's car accident. But the situation, it has changed, hasn't it?
It has.
Right now, what Errol Spence is coming from is a car accident. And at any point in between that time,
now,
Danny Garcia and his team could have made the decision to settle up with Terrence Crawford instead of keeping busy with Ivan Redkach. It's actually kind of a lose-lose for Danny Garcia, if you think about it. He's running the risk of losing the fight to Errol Spence, but even if he wins, there are those out there who are going to bring up that car accident and say that, you know, the only reason that Danny was able to get this guy is because of what he was coming from. In a Terrence Crawford situation, you wouldn't be fighting a guy that's coming from a car accident. You'd be fighting a primed fighter, an undefeated 3-division champion. No excuses if you beat him.
they got history in the amateurs.
They are 1-1 with each other in the amateur ranks, and a match in the professional ranks would have been the proverbial tiebreaker. Having traded so many barbs with each other over social media the last couple of years,
Back and forth.
would have been the ideal conditions, the ideal scenario for Danny Garcia and Terrence Crawford to finally lock horns in the professional ranks. If not instead of the Granados fight, after the Granados fight. But we can see here,
He ain't want it.
that's just not what Danny Garcia wanted.
So you're fighting Spence.
That Crawford fight would have been a pay-per-view the same way that this Errol Spence fight is supposed to be a pay-per-view. If Danny Garcia felt in his heart of hearts that he could beat Terrence Crawford, why didn't he cross the street to fight him?
Huh?
Danny doesn't have an exclusivity deal with Fox the way that Terrence has one with ESPN. Danny doesn't have an exclusivity deal with Showtime the way that Terrence has one with ESPN. There's no real reason that Danny's movements should be so inhibited that he passes on that opportunity, which would then have to mean the only reason you didn't take them up on their offer is because you didn't want it. So you're sitting here talking about this Spence fight and how you don't want excuses, but this is the situation that you chose to be in. You know what you're doing, and you know why you're fighting him. Where Terrence Crawford, in reference to a Errol Spence fight, is saying, don't fight me next, as a result of that car accident, that he'd rather Errol Spence take a tune-up fight to get back in the swing of things ahead of a fight with him. But Terrence Crawford is saying, don't fight me next because of that car accident. Danny Garcia is set to do it, is set to fight him. So if Danny really didn't want any excuses after potentially beating Errol Spence,
If he does.
well, he'd be taking the stance that Terrence Crawford is taking. Only that, he'd be fighting Terrence Crawford instead of Errol Spence, because if you beat Terrence Crawford, there really wouldn't be any excuses after the fight.
He's prime.
With Spence, there have been widespread rumors and speculations for weeks and months as to what the actual state of this guy is. What's his actual condition? Is it being downplayed to the media? Is he worse off than they're letting on? And this is the fighter that you're choosing to fight. This is the situation you're walking into.
Coincidence? I think not.
Danny's got options. He's got an alternative. He always had an alternative. He always turned it down. He always walked away. So it is what it is. Danny can say that he doesn't want excuses if he beats Errol Spence. He can say that.
But this is what you chose.
You're choosing to fight a guy who was just in a horrific car wreck towards the end of last year. You will be his first fight since having been in that car accident. And at any point between then and now, you had the option of fighting someone else, another undefeated champion. You made your bed, you've got to lie in it. This is what you wanted, this is what you're going to get, and you've got to deal with the consequences, whatever they are.